Welcome everyone to our webinar today. My name is Cara Christophe and I am the APAC Marketing Manager. Just to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded today. The recording will be available to you all and it will be sent to you via email in should be the next 2 or 3 days, just once everything is ready to go. Please feel free to ask questions whenever throughout the presentation is fine. The presentation will go for around 30 minutes and then there will be plenty of time for Q&A. But please feel free to type them up when you think of them so they're queued and ready to go at the end. I would like to also just give a quick shout out to anyone from Melbourne who's in lockdown. Our 2 presenters from NCC Group, Mo and Anton, are actually both presenting from Melbourne today. So we have tested all of our systems, but please forgive us for any glitches. And now I think that's enough for me and we will hand over to our presenters to introduce themselves. Thanks.
Good morning, afternoon and evening, everyone, depending on where you are located. Hope you're well and thanks for joining us. My name is Mo Low. I'm a security architect with NCC Group. I have about 19 years experience advising organizations on the maturity of their architectures and improving their overall security posture for companies such as Accenture and IBM and now NCC. I've managed multiple engagements covering strategy, architecture, IRAP audits, the typical ISO, NIST, IEC assessments, privacy and governance. I have a background in financial services, health, telco and government. And with that, I hand over to my colleague, Anton.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anton Pavlov. I used to be a developer for a number of years, software developer, that's it. Switched to security about 7 years ago. I do penetration testing on cloud installations and I do technical architecture reviews in the cloud mostly. However, I do other parts of the security landscape, mostly in technical space. And then we move to Dean.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, NCC, first and foremost. Great to be here today. My name is Dean Lawrence. I work for AWS as the Security Partner Manager. My background is about somewhere close to 15 years, maybe about 13, working in information security and roles across antivirus, encryption vendors, security operations, etc. And now I'm working for AWS, helping our partners solving our customers' cloud security challenges.
Thank you, Dean. I think just as an overview, we'll start with what the shared responsibility model is. We'll then move on to further detail for each of the subsections of the model, and we'll go between myself and Anton before finalizing with some specific business capabilities that NCC Group and AWS together have that can be leveraged, and these will be summarized in the webinar. Next slide, please. So during the early days of cloud, it wasn't clear to customers and cloud providers as to who was responsible for which portion of the cloud solution. And here we're thinking, a clear, defined RACI. This only became a problem when something went wrong in the early days, with each party pointing fingers or assigning blame. So AWS was at the forefront of formalizing these responsibilities so that it was clear to everyone, which then gave rise to this shared responsibility model. So the model is an AWS concept that details the responsibilities between the customer and the AWS, and has now been adopted as a cloud standard. This presentation will focus on the blue, basically the above the line responsibilities of the customer, which is security in the cloud, with AWS responsible for protecting the AWS infrastructure, which is security of the cloud. So as an example, on your home door, AWS will provide a lock and key, but it is your onus and your responsibility to ensure you close the door and lock it. Note, the level of customer responsibility may also be determined by the level of services that the organization is using. So for example, in a software as a service, the customer will have less responsibility, but not zero responsibility. Of course, that comes at the expense of less freedom, where you have to accept the solution workflows of whatever SaaS solution you have chosen. Next slide, please. So the customer data slide, it's always good to start with a base. And for that, we generally look towards best practice, data management body of knowledge, the ISO NIST series, and more importantly, what's going to come soon is the enterprise architecture, cloud controls matrix. It should be coming in either this month or next month. The CSA, which is the Cloud Security Alliance, who drives the Cloud Control Matrix, or CCM, will soon be releasing an extension of their CCM. So they are going to actually associate this shared responsibility model elements that we're going to talk to with their CCM, or the Cloud Controls Matrix. So we generally start with the business requirements and try to gain that golden thread or traceability from the business strategy all the way down to the security strategy in all the projects for transparency purposes, and it makes it easy to confirm whether you've actually hit your KPIs or whether you're driving success. Strategy maps and balanced scorecard is the typical solution, and are great resources to assist with that. Now, the Data Management Body of Knowledge and the Data Governance Council are valuable resources to assist with firming up all things data, and we leverage them when these resources to provide guidance on data governance to your owners, your custodians, the stewards, etc. And it's a good idea also to formalize your data architecture. So looking at the data quality, the data security, and here our consultants leverage the DMBOK significantly, as well as some enterprise architecture and security architecture tools such as TOGAF and SABSA. And it's also good to have a formalized information security manual framework comprising policies, standards, and procedures. We also suggest that a privacy impact assessment is a good idea to highlight any issues with managing any personally identifiable or sensitive information. And this includes the ingestion, the usage, the management, the retention, and the disposal of data. I now hand over to Anton.
Yes, thank you, Mo. So the first 6 months of the year, there's been 518 notifiable data breaches in Australia. The number of those breaches in the cloud will increase because more and more organizations move to the cloud. So what attracts attackers to your data? Well, first of all, your data, your personal information, your enterprise data, even your customer analytics or logs can be sold. It's money, so obviously this is where they want to be. Specifically, their personal information is most important for them. But enterprise data itself, even without personal information, also create an interesting target. Now, everybody read news titles like hackers vacuum data, indicating that they indiscriminately copy everything from enterprise, and then some other people do data clearinghouse duties and analyze that data later. One interesting piece of enterprise data that we recently encountered was a list of known vulnerabilities placed in Confluence. Yes, if Confluence is compromised, so is the list, and suddenly your profile getting much more interesting for the attacker. Anonymized analytics data is an interesting target as well. This data helps to improve customer experience. And if this data helps you, it can help your competitors, so it's a value in there too. Your logs can be mined to build enterprise recon profile. There is occasional personal information bits in the logs too, especially if you collect and store logs from your customers. So to conclude, data is a valuable target and protection of it is important, and you are responsible even in the cloud. Next slide.
We are actually going to our first poll now. So let me just launch that one for you. So our first poll for today: what level of security architecture frameworks have been leveraged to improve your organization's security posture? We'll just give you a couple, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to answer that. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, we've got half the people have voted. Just another few seconds. Okay, so it looks like a majority of attendees have answered that they are aligned to one or more frameworks.
That is probably to be expected, because with the heightened alertness of companies, organizations, and the requirement to notify regarding data breaches and security, organizations are looking to align. So it's good to hear. Good to hear. Next slide, please. In terms of platforms and applications, we now delve into the application architecture. And this should cover your on-premises, your data center, and your AWS cloud to secure the applications, and as well as the data flows across all the applications and also the interfaces externally. We tend to look at TOGAF as a model, looking at the data flow diagrams and or any enterprise application integration patterns. And if your staff are developing applications, then leveraging something like the OWASP secure coding practices is a good idea to ensure that you are you're performing secure software development in your organization. And if it's not your staff and you rely on third parties, then we need to look to tighten the third party agreements or contracts that you have, service level agreements, possibly conducting supplier assessments for those critically identified suppliers. You can also manage, we're not only looking at the technical and the contractual, we also can manage any changes via change advisory board, and that's where you're ensuring that security is baked into the process. Any changes to configurations, to applications, etc., are managed and funneled through the change advisory board. We also recommend a layered defense or in-depth approach, which would include the new joiners in terms of recruitment, ensuring background checks are all done, law enforcement checks if required, security levels, access control enforcement in terms of the role-based access control, and that you have the various policies to ensure that your organization is secure. Next slide, please. Identity and access management may be a topic of a webinar or two of its own. However, here I'll just emphasize some of the components. So for governance, we're looking for regular reviews. The agenda items should be relevant. There's a segregation of duties, and that where there's also a focus on compliance. On the identity management, we investigate the approvals of access, the actual access provisioning or deprovisioning, essentially the joiners, movers, or leavers in your organization, and also have a look at password management in terms of the strength and complexity. For authentication authorizations, users find it less cumbersome with single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, which is a good way to go. And we also expect organizations to, on an ongoing basis, monitor and audit the access logs, and also provide some form of reporting, whether it's regulatory, which may be external, or internal to the IT. We now go to a quick poll, another quick poll, and then on to Anton. Thank you, Cara.
Okay, let me just speed that one up. Okay, this poll is just launching now. Do you believe enough effort is placed on security as cloud deployments may be too quick for thorough security testing? This one's an easy yes, no, or unsure. Just do another 10 seconds of voting. So at this stage, majority of respondents are answering no. And yeah, no's right way out in front.
I think that is probably a typical case, because there's extensive tomes written on DevOps that's bringing the development and the operations, and now we're looking at inserting or baking in the security aspect, which is DevSecOps. So it's still a place that the security needs to find a seat at that table. So that is to be expected.
Yes, next one, please. Taking over on the identity and access management from the technical perspective, identity management is probably the most complicated part of the cloud deployment. The reason being simply because there's so many options for you as a deployer of this solution to implement identity management. Some original design of AWS Identity and Access Managers management was self-contained, but of course, everybody wants to integrate it with enterprise identity management, which is Active Directory on premises. However, we're going a little bit further when we roll out Kubernetes, because Kubernetes has its own RBAC model, and we have to tie up Kubernetes role-based access control with AWS access management and enterprise Active Directory. And adding up integration with third-party services, some of them are in the cloud, some of them rolled out on premises, create yet another level of complexity where you have to completely go through and integrate every component, and components are very easy to deploy. Coming back to the poll, majority of people say that security is lagging, and that is the problem of the cloud in general is amazing speed of development and deployment. So it's no wonder that identity management is the most interesting part of penetration test. We usually find most of vulnerabilities in this area. Next slide is a poll.
Sorry, next poll. Okay, so the next poll, our third poll of the day is, I'm going to launch that one now. Which form of identity and access management have you implemented? So this one's got 5 answers, so you might want to read these ones a bit more closely, and we'll just give you another 30 seconds to answer. The answers so far are 50-50 with this one. Okay, so most respondents have answered actually the second answer, which is integrate identity and access management with enterprise AD.
Where is it? Yeah, I think sometimes, yeah, the amount of, you can't actually single sign on for everything. So you have to choose your, choose the applications, and in certain cases, different cloud providers, different applications have the ability to integrate well. With others, you have to look at third-party services. So that the second one is as well to be expected, and yep, from most organizations.
Moving on to the next slide, it's application layer. On the same layer as identity is applications. I chose deployment pipeline as an example of application deployed in the cloud. It is kind of interesting application by itself, because traditionally deployment pipeline was deployed by software development organizations, but recent trend of infrastructure as code actually made everybody a software development organization, because everybody now source the description of cloud in the repository. Everybody deploys that through pipeline. So suddenly the focus has shifted of security to the protection of source code repository, to the protection of DevOps team member credentials, and protection of things like secrets in the code. Even open space offices now suddenly become a very interesting attack target, because people can watch the definitions on the screens of the DevOps team members. This is an interesting and unexpected twist of infrastructure as code. Software development organizations have a large body of knowledge how to protect their IP, but generally speaking, other organizations who never actually experienced software development sometimes deploy pipeline in an insecure manner. Other interesting aspects of deployment pipeline as an application is automation of the deployment pipeline. Typically, it happens on merge requests, and it's a great feature. It allows to speed up the development and the deployment. However, side effect of it increased security risk, because if somebody is able to execute merge request, you actually deploying his code immediately in the cloud. Another interesting aspect of application deployment pipeline is it's a programmatic tear down. People instantiate tear down feature because it minimizes the cloud costs, which is great. However, because this feature exists and is available, it is possible to tear down automatically the whole installation, and that increases the risk again. And additionally, of course, pipeline itself is an application, and the security of that application has to be established in the cloud. Next slide. Platforms, the same as applications. We're looking at the trend of moving from platform as code and infrastructure as code to fully managed software as code installations. More and more people actually adopt fully managed software services. Why? That shifts the security responsibility from your organization somewhat into the provider of the software service. Now you don't need to worry about the configuration, and you don't need to manage this facility. It's all good. However, there are security aspects that you need to be aware of when you move to fully managed SaaS. One important aspect to consider is that it has limited administration capability. By definition, now you are not able to manage your underlying infrastructure, which may be not good from security perspective. And of course, it's still a shared responsibility model, which means that all the data in that fully managed SaaS is still your responsibility. Next slide.
So if your organization is basically starting from scratch with having to harden or security harden the desktop servers databases, then a good place to start would be the Center for Internet Security Benchmarks. They provide hardening guidance for almost all operating systems, desktop servers, network devices, mobiles. And not only that, we would also recommend regular reviews. You should have a good patch management, and these are just part of the typical assessment criteria we'd be looking for. So in the technology architecture, we look at the network design, the configuration. We look for, in terms of the architecture, whether you have detection, intrusion detection, or prevention. We look at the segmentation across the multiple zones. We look at control lists. All of these are enablers to secure and restrict access to your environment. But it all starts with strong asset management. So if you have a good inventory of your network devices, the job then just becomes easier to determine, any intruder devices. At least you have an understanding of that. It makes it easier, but yeah, the hackers, etc., will make it harder for you to find them. From an account management perspective, we also look at the typical default accounts. And a question to the audience is, have you actually changed your home router default password that comes with your router? If not, that's one example of where we'd look at default accounts. Firewalls, etc. We look for the policies that are associated with the firewalls, and obviously the hardening suggestions from the CIS benchmarks on your firewalls. I now hand over to Anton.
Yes, operating system, networking, and firewalls layer. So from technical perspective, this layer is well understood because it's a traditional layer, has been deployed for a long, long time. As a result, a large number of attacks are automated on this layer. Specifically, endpoints are targets for endless automatic scans. And slowly, attacker builds a profile of you because every time you change something that can be diffed with the scans, and eventually profile of you become entry in some attacker's database. Now, why it is interesting is because if attacker acquire an exploit, a good one, it can be targeted on a software stack, and if you check part of that selection, you get the exploit very quick. as I said, it's largely automatic nowadays. So the risk exists of your front end being attacked successfully, your web service being attacked and owned by the attacker, and that's where defense in depth is very important. The one that Mo just talked about, it is you have to understand that once your web server fails, that is not the end of the game, and your protection in form of firewalls, in form of segmentation, in form of authentication, still allow you to react and respond to this incident. Another interesting thing that you can do is threat intelligence. It is a forward-looking service that search for new and emerging threats and notify the subscribers about the threats that are only gaining the momentum right now. So if you are a subscriber to this kind of feed, then you have advanced knowledge and you can strengthen your stack, apply the patches, etc. And it is giving you some advantage in the fight. Okay, moving on.
So yep, encryption at the client server network level. We are looking for the encryption that's employed at the various levels in the org and the state. There's actually three, whether it's at rest and whether the messages, etc., are in transit, or whether it's in a transient environment that still has to be removed. So the critical thing is that in these days we have hardship information due to COVID, etc., loss of jobs. So this is sensitive information where you've got clients or customers that have indicators on them that are showing, either financial hardship. They're also showing payment information, lack of payment information coming through, the health status of the individual in terms of, your My Health record, and the integration with the My Health record has allowed, access to various individuals to your particular health status. And the other one is around intellectual property, where organizations want to manage and maintain their intellectual property. So for that, we look at the encryption of the asset, the likes of BitLocker, the laptop or the computer. We also look for the storage on the device, for example, the hard drive. We'll look for encryption of the hard drives, and also the encryption of the USB or thumb devices that will be inserted into the laptop or computer. Alternatives, of course, where you can actually just ban the use of USBs on laptop and they just cannot actually work. We just got to ensure also that we don't forget the other cloud-based storage providers, which the person will still have access to. We look for database and server encryption as well. And obviously the data is at rest at that moment, but as soon as it starts moving, we look at the encryption of the message. You either encrypt the whole pipe in terms of a VPN, or you encrypt the message itself, and then you also apply transport layer security, which is the latest, as opposed to the SSL, which is a bit less secure. I'll move on to Anton.
From technical perspective, encryption is always a challenge. Typically, people are not cryptographers. We don't recommend people to implement their own cryptography, and nobody actually does, except for specialized services. Implementing cryptography is hard. NCC, the company we both work for, actually provides special services for cryptographic code reviews. This division employs people who know what they're doing. I personally wouldn't touch cryptographic code review myself. But further on, from the technical perspective, the biggest challenge that people have with cryptography is not implementation, it's rather legacy configuration. Cryptography has been around for a while, and invariably, algorithms that were safe before, not safe anymore, so you end up with unsafe configurations using DES, 3DS, MD4, MD5, SSL3, TLS1, and if you don't do periodic reviews of your configuration, you end up with insecure installation. Another aspect of cryptography, technical aspect that you actually is responsible for, is blockchain adoption. It's great technology, terrific, but the libraries are quite new and therefore suspect in terms of vulnerabilities in them. It is disruptive, and because there's not much expertise in organization with these libraries, if something goes wrong, the risk exists that you're going to lose data using this. So it is interesting technology challenge. And of course, with the cryptography, disaster data recovery is a challenge. And you need to prepare yourself to the recovery of encrypted data, ransomware attacks, etc. But just trivial loss of key also plays a role. And so to conclude, encryption is your responsibility, not the cloud. Next slide.
So to summarize, what the shared responsibility model is saying that you cannot actually abdicate your responsibility as an organization to the cloud provider. And so we need to understand and work with them, and also work with our organization to understand what we're actually responsible for. It's a big task. And in that respect, in terms of a focused set of practices and service line, NCC Group has a cloud security practice, an architecture practice. We also have, in a previous webinar, we have an APRA CPS 234 for those financial services people. We have basically a telco focus. So we have multiple practices which brings together certified individuals who have that architecture background, which are looking for security architecture, data architecture. If there's a particular specialty like telco operational technologies like the rail, we have that too, but in the interest of this particular webinar, this would be the focus. We also have in the cloud practice and the cloud focus, we leverage our AWS resources in terms of the well-architected framework, some quick starts. We also have some solution architects that could assist. And in terms of standards, we cover the gamut. So this is just a subset of them, the whole ISO series, and then the operational technologies of IEC and NIST 882, and as well as the cybersecurity framework. So we have a lot that we can assist organizations with, and we look forward to future discussions. And I believe we go to questions. Any questions?
Yes, everyone. Thanks, Mo and Anton. And now we will have Dean joining us as well for the questions. We do have a few through. And I will just ask if there is a particular person you would like to throw to for the questions, just pop their name in. Anton covering more technical and testing and penetration and development, and Mo covering more architecture and regulations and compliance. And of course, Dean is here to answer all your AWS specific questions. So we do have a couple through, which I will start with. I think this one is more for Mo, and the question is, what assurances can be given to board of directors that information assets are protected according to the risk appetite or tolerance of the organization?
To provide the assurance, we provide assessments and we provide audits. So what we do is we look at the assets, the way the assets are managed. We then look at your risk management framework. We look whether the application of the risk framework has been followed. We then also look at how your threat modeling is progressing. And then we also, on top of that, we look at each of the different controls depending on the particular focus that the organization or the board of directors would like to see. We also look at the from a strategy, the policies, etc. We choose a particular controls matrix, or we choose a particular architecture with which we assess the organizations against. Typically, the board is looking for either the strategy, the policies, the risk management practices, and we provide an assessment that will give a guarantee to the organization of a certain level of maturity in each of the different categories of controls.
Just from our perspective too, I'll jump in there around some resources you can leverage from AWS. So as part of our third-party attestations of the security of the cloud, portions of our responsibility of the shared responsibility model, you can leverage our AWS Artifact service, which is free for our customers. And Artifact contains effectively the publication of those third-party security assessments assessments that we do via our independent audit community. So in that service, you'll find PCI DSS, ISO 27001. More locally, you'll find IRAP for our federal government customers, Information Security Registers Assessors Program. I always get that one wrong. And information around APA CPS 234 and the like. So highly encourage that. It's a free resource to utilize that you can pull from your AWS account.
Yep.
Excellent.
And just in terms of the health, AWS also certified against the HIPAA, which is the American version, and we can perform privacy impact assessments, etc., which looks at sensitive information and health information that's managed by the organization.
Okay. The next question is, I'm not sure if Mo or Anton is the best to answer this one, but it is, what is the significance of having DLP solution in cloud for data security?
And
data loss protection.
Yep. So Anton, are you going to answer?
Yes, I can answer. With DLP solutions, anything that you deploy to protect the data is good. I think about the services that we deploy. They cost sometimes a lot, and they not always deliver what they promise. Either it's DLP or adversarial like carbon black or whatever. Yeah, so those things they need to be tested essentially, right? If they can deliver are good. But again, if you have a budget and you can deploy this thing, it's great, terrific. In terms of technical ability to get to data, it is, you have to understand that there are two types of attack vectors. We're not only looking at people who are unauthenticated internet users. Majority of data leaks are actually internal data leaks. So we're looking always at authenticated attack vector from the enterprise to the cloud. Because there is an integration of AD and the AWS identity management, it is more likely that authenticated low privilege users can actually attempt to look at something that they shouldn't. And that's where the majority of the vulnerabilities are when we do the assessment. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I'll just jump on the back. Completely agree, Anton. I think permissions and roles in identity is absolutely critical to any data protection strategy. From our perspective, we always look at classification of data alongside data leakage or data loss prevention, whichever acronym you want to use. If you are interested in what that looks like in terms of native services from AWS, have a look at Amazon Macie, M-A-C-I-E, which is a pre-configured tool which you can use in Amazon to look for PII characteristics within your data. So yeah, tax file numbers, etc. There's some Australian standards in there, but the classic ones in the US might be Social Security, for example. Driver's license, I think we also apply here in Australia as well. So there's those tags that you can search for in your data using Amazon Macie, which will also help you classify the data. The other thing around data is that when customers are doing a migration of data from on-premise into the cloud, it does represent a good time to have a look at those type of data strategies. So tagging of assets in when you're building infrastructure in AWS is always a good idea to look at criticality of data across different workloads and different infrastructure that you're building.
Yep, so in that case, the policies regarding data classification, information handling, and then any privacy assessments and data flow diagrams would assist in identifying what the data is and how you need to secure it. And then once it's been compromised, the business continuity disaster recovery will look at recovering that data.
Awesome, thank you. The next one is definitely an Anton question. It is any views on storing encryption keys. I believe every time there should be a decentralized approach where keys are stored with the customer but not with the cloud provider.
KMS is a great service, and using HSM to store your secrets is very good. It's a known security practice. It's a best practice. Or whether you consider okay, so there is like a balance of it. Of course, if you want to distribute some package and you're concerned about accessibility to the cloud, and you want to decode it, decrypt it like on site, then yes, key distribution has to go, offline in some way. But in terms of the storage of secrets in the cloud, there are well-known things that you can do. Like the worst thing you can do, of course, is hard coding it in your application. But if you do deployment and then you use KMS and you ask KMS programmatically about the secret when you do connection, then that particular pattern is very good.
Yeah,
Thanks,
again, just to add to what Anton, just to add to what Anton said, at AWS, we give you the flexibility to do both. You can have AWS Managed Keys or Customer Managed Keys via KMS, which Anton rightly mentioned is a very popular service amongst our customers, including our regulated customer community, so financial services, government, etc., and Cloud HSM as well. You can also leverage, or you could rightfully leverage your own HSM technology where you can look and feel and touch that. So it is up to customer risk appetite. We give you the flexibility to do it either way.
Great. And Mo, the next question is for you. It says, if personal information is stored in cloud, whether cloud customer needs to be certified in ISO 27001 and 2718, or cloud provider certifications and alignment with regulation is enough?
Just repeat that.
Yeah, so I might not have done the best reading out. So let me do it again. If personal information is stored in the cloud, then it says whether the cloud customer needs to be certified in ISO 27001 and 2718, or cloud provider certifications and alignment with regulation is enough.
I think it's sometimes people believe that a certification will get you everything. But the thing is, what happens is a certification may be at a point in time, and then it depends on the frequency of which you get that certification. So you work up to the certification 27,001 and 18, and then afterwards you put something in place, and then either through human error, which is potentially the biggest portion of the data breaches and loss and access to PII, is through human error. So yes, it's good to be certified against certain, the 27K series. It's also good to align with the regulations, and sometimes the governmental regulations are a bit less than the actual 27K1 requirements. Sometimes they're more. However, it's good to attack it from both ends, either from a management and a reporting and a governance to the government, as well as the certification 27001. But it's also good to understand your own security architecture in terms of your data flows, your data architecture, your information architecture, and get a good handle on that, because certification at a point in time, new application gets rolled out, and then you are questioning whether that new application still allows you to get coverage from a PII access perspective.
Yeah, you could certainly leverage our artifact service for some of the controls against those frameworks, but coming back to the concept of shared responsibility, there are aspects that a customer must manage above the line in terms of security in the cloud, where not only is that security best practice to kind of configure that in the way that is secure, but also from an auditor perspective, I'm sure there's a number of controls above the line that the auditor would need to tick the box on when handing out 27001, etc.
Okay, thanks guys. The next question is actually quite a long one, so I'm going to summarize it. So the question comes from a project manager for all security projects in Singapore, and they're soon going to start doing, these are acronyms, I don't know what they mean, EKYC and AML projects using public cloud. So they state, you mentioned about PII and associated breaches, and even though financial services may be ultimately accountable for those, is this person correct to say that most of the underlying security responsibility still lies with the solution provider and cloud provider?
Challenging. Anti-money laundering, is that what they're looking at? So this is financial services, Singapore. I think
know your customer, I think, is the KYC.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it comes down to the service that you're implementing for the workload or the use case that you're undertaking. As Mo and Anton rightly pointed out, depending on the service that you consume, whether that's virtual computing via EC2 or whether that's serverless technology, which then shifts the line of shared responsibility in a complete AWS managed service like an AWS Lambda, where we're giving you everything under the hood to effectively allow you to just execute code of your application. In that model, we assume a lot of the responsibility because we've got all the underlying infrastructure. Whereas if you were to consume a virtual server in an EC2 instance, for example, you're responsible for a lot more of the stack because of the workload that you're building on top of that and the flexibility you have to add operating system flavors, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, so if you look at that shared responsibility model, the various capabilities within AWS will be leveraging certain aspects of it. And in the case of Lambda, we go above the line and provide further capability, and therefore that falls within the AWS solution provider. But if you start, if you're starting your own servers, etc., then that still is responsibility of yourself. The other thing is that the cloud solution provider will provide the storage, but the motion and the movement of that PII within the AWS environment and then back out to your on-prem or data center or externally to the regulators or just being exfiltrated is still the accountability of the customer.
Yeah, an interesting thing to add about this is to consider the traffic. Is it going across public internet, for example, when you communicate this data? Is it on the private channels? That is one interesting aspect of the technology solution.
Okay, and the next question is to Mo and Dean. It says, using Office 365 as an example, as it is a MS product and Microsoft has its security testing, how much does a small company look to invest in cloud security?
I'd like to handball to Dean.
Can you repeat the first half? Was it using MS Office?
Yeah, so it just says, like, as an example, using Office 365 and as an example, using Office 365 as an example. So it's just saying it's a Microsoft product that does its own security testing. So then how much should a small company look to invest in cloud security?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to say the workload is almost irrelevant because that's probably not the right sentiment to leave here. I think depending on whether it's PII or whether it's an application that potentially runs something that isn't as critical to the users underneath the hood, I would invest as much time and resource as you can in security, because ultimately you need to make the call of risk to your organization. So similarly as you would build infrastructure on premise, you need to assess how to appropriate controls around that. I guess if the question is kind of where to start in terms of security, Anton's made a really good point around identity. You know, who you grant access to and what access levels those individuals have is your primary and most important security control in the cloud. Because if you think about an access model for AWS versus you know, traditional, what you would do is in traditional environments is build infrastructure, install upon that a set of applications, and then give people access. But if you look at a cloud model, it's completely flipped, where you're giving people access to build applications which provision virtual infrastructure. So identity is always the most important. But in terms of where and how much you spend, it's a little bit of a piece of string question. You know, small businesses that potentially are fintech startups, for example, may have a lot more regulation versus a small business who's operating a retail organization or you know, operating in a different vertical. I don't know, Mo, if you had anything to add to that.
Yep. Obviously small in size versus small in revenue, not sure, but with these smaller organizations, what happens is that the documentation is the one that lags. So what you have to do then is to invest in security, you should invest in your people. So if you get good people, you can have an access management policy, but no one follows it. But if you have good people who understands process, it's well knit, the access management, the HR functionality, if there is, and the IT functionality are close knit, they understand each other, they understand the process. You may not have documented it, so if you're coming from an ISO perspective and perform an assessment, then you might fail. But the thing is, from a human perspective, you might be strong in terms of that. So the investment in security is first in your people. Once the people are secured, and then you move up the maturity level in terms of get your documentation, because if there's a risk that your people may leave or that something happens that embedded within your documentation. So it's first of all, it's the amount of money that you're willing to spend in terms of getting the documentation, purchasing the tools to secure your organization. It depends on your budget, but I'd first say go for the really good people and secure them. And once that's secured, then hopefully they can maintain the security of the environment.
Yeah, I have to add, I agree with Mo. People are the best investment, but from technical perspective, the best investment in the people is threat modeling, because to understand the shifting landscape and you know, trust zones and attack vectors, you need to be on board with the threat modeling lingo and understanding how decomposition works. And you know, if you go for security training for your people, I think the first thing you should consider is a threat modeling course for everybody.
Just the one last thing to add on there, well, there's two things. It's cyber insurance, depending on so you'll have an full understanding of your assets, and therefore you'll have an understanding of the value of this asset should they be lost. Based on that, you can determine whether you need cyber insurance. That will ensure that if anything happens. The other one is that look to another third party from a augmentation perspective. So you may not have the capabilities in-house, but you may look at a third party to assist with, if something happens, you have access to forensic. If you want to build on your processes, you don't have the resource at the moment, you bring in some security advisors, etc., to assist with a quick policy pack, 25, 30 documentations, etc. So in terms of that, there's a price to pay in terms of the actual effort required, but then in terms of the ongoing, in terms of the resources, there may not be. So the quick hits, cyber insurance to make sure there's, if anything fails, you've got coverage. Quick hit in terms of third-party agreements from staff augmentation, depending on which level you want to target at.
Great. So I just want to quickly say we do still have quite a few questions here. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but all of the questions asked today, even the ones we don't get to, will be answered, and we will be releasing a blog with all of the questions and the answers, and that will be out sometime next week. So if we can't get to it now, it will still be answered. I think actually, Dean, I might ask you this one. It says, in your opinion, what do you think is the reason for faster pace of cloud adoption, especially by banks in regions other than APAC? Do you think it is the regulatory bodies, or are banks not ready to trust the cloud yet?
So sorry, is the question what's the reason for faster adoption in APAC versus the world?
I think in other reasons, I think it says, what do you think is the reason for faster pace? Or it's saying in other regions, not APAC.
Yeah, good question. I'm pretty APAC focused, so I don't have a lot of visibility of some of our international brands. But what I will say about APAC, and I know this probably isn't answering the question, happy to hook you up with some of our team overseas if it's of interest to dive a little deeper. But what I will say about APAC is there's been, if we look at ANZ in particular, Australia, and APRA, who's the payments regulator, there's been a fundamental shift in their opinion of cloud services over the last, let's say, 24 to 36 months. So if you look at their white paper from 2015 versus their white paper from 2018, there's a very monumental shift in their thinking around cloud services, and therefore that's unlocked a lot of the innovation that we see now in our top tier banks, our fintechs, our neobanking community, etc. And that's really been one of the strong catalysts for digital innovation within those organizations, and that's really built on the back of, one, the regulators' understanding of cloud services, but two, the continual maturity of cloud services security controls, both in the security of the cloud and also security in the cloud. Like I said, if you need more answers on the flip side of that coin into the US or something like that, then please let me know.
I think in some aspects also it's related to data sovereignty. So in terms of the other countries, perhaps they have less of a data sovereignty focus, unsure. The other one is that I know the Australian Signals Directorate used to come out with a secure clouds list. Now they are no longer providing that service. So now the hesitancy in terms of, can I choose a cloud provider or not? Where's the list? So there's none of that. So the onus is now back onto the banks. The other impact is that, especially in financial services, is all the Royal Commissions in FS, etc., which has driven the security architecture. So Royal Commission comes out. Now we look into our process. We look into focusing and firming up our security before we then going out and then start, expanding into going into further cloud environments. So those are some of the things that may just keep back the momentum in moving to the cloud.
Excellent. And I actually am going to leave the questions there. We are out of time now. So I would like to say, of course, a big thank you to our presenters today.
And thank you to the audience for sticking with us.
Yes, thank you for everyone. Sorry, guys. Thank you for everyone who registered and attended today. And as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it has been recorded, and that recording will be released in the next couple of days. And we also will be releasing a blog, which you will also get, or you can find online, and that will be answering all the questions. And so then you have it there as a reference point. Thank you again to our speakers and for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.